I'm going to go ahead and let Michelle give us a little background on why we decided to do this session today.
Yep. So there has been a lot of interesting trends in warning letters and 483s that we thought would make for some lively conversation with this group. We're going to go over some recent enforcement trends and kind of the perspective that FDA has taken on different quality issues. Ty, you
Great.
have anything to add?
No, I think that sums it up. It's kind of it's not a super long deck today. So like Sean said, we invite you to talk and participate because a lot of it is about reading between the lines, just so you can see kind of what the focus is on and what positions, FDA is taking, that you kind of have to, react to as members of industry.
So we're super interested in, we're going to be talking about our experiences. We're super interested in what your experiences have been and if they're similar to ours or differing. So, speak up and let us know what experiences you guys have had. Sure. Okay.
You want me to start sharing?
Yeah.
All right. Is it the right side or do I need to switch?
That's right.
It's right. Okay. All right. Well, I was like, Sean already introduced us, but here we are again.
Well, we didn't introduce Morty Lucy and Lily King.
Yeah. That's the C-suite who are at present already hard at work taking naps
Hmm,
a
adorable.
whole hour in. So
All right. Well, here's a little bit of the warning letters we're going to cover today. All of them have been in the last year, just to kind of give you guys the perspective. There's a very interesting case, if you haven't heard about it, with Whoop. There's been a big push with registration and listing warning letters, and then warning letters to foreign labs. So, Michelle, I don't know if you want to start.
yeah. So pretty much year over year, the top five things that get 483s are pretty consistently, and they'll vary a little bit in order, but CAPA, complaints, design controls, purchasing controls, and non-conforming product. Um, and so, like, if you think about what's about to happen with the QMSR, under the QSR, these are already the big gaps underneath the current paradigm. So you can expect when we transition to the QMSR that if we're already not doing things right under the QSR, that these findings are going to continue to skyrocket in these particular areas. So if we look at the 483 metrics in fiscal year 24 was 672, whereas fiscal year 25 was 791 um, uh, uh, 43s. And so pretty much you can count on lack or inadequate procedures being at the top of the list. And then specifically, it goes down again consistently to complaint procedures year over year. Then one or the other of those top five issues.
And we should back up. We started with talking about warning letters, but 483s are what FDA issues to you when they come and do an on-site inspection. So they're kind of like the non-conformance report for FDA. When they come in, inspect you, find that there's errors or issues in your quality management systems. So we're starting with 483s because there's a lot more of them and they inform where FDA is putting their like priority issues or what they're seeing, like Michelle was saying. So usually you have a 483 and then you get an opportunity to respond to that 483 following the inspection. And then you can either give the FDA an adequate response by saying, here's our corrections, or you give them an inadequate response, which FDA then expects you to discuss what the issues were. And you can have another opportunity to give them an adequate response. But if you give them another inadequate response, you get a warning letter. So you have to usually you have to make a mistake quite a few times, usually, to go right to a warning letter response. Then, once you get a warning letter, you get another opportunity to submit either an adequate response. And if you continue to have inadequate responses, you go to the consent decree, which is like the ultimate hammer, just to kind of orient you in what the usual workflow is.
That's where FDA basically moves in as your roommate.
Yeah.
So these are some common wording in pretty much every warning letter has got similar wording in that your firm should take prompt action to address any violations identified in this letter. Failure to adequately address this matter may result in regulatory action being initiated by the FDA without further notice. These actions include, but are not limited to, seizure, injunction, and civil penalties. And similarly, they also consistently say, please notify this office in writing within 15 business days from the date you received this letter of the specific steps your firm has taken to address the noted violations, as well as in explanation of how your firm plans to prevent these violations or similar violations from occurring again. Include documentation of the corrections and corrective actions. So the FDA expects you to be pretty much Johnny on the spot in your response.
Yeah. And then this is basically out of almost every warning letter. There are a few exceptions. We'll talk about that. But this is just kind of standard language. When you look at the letter metrics, it's actually there's a shockingly little amount, in my opinion, that get issued every year. So these are the primary quality management system reasons. I mean, design and risk management is almost always the top contender, which is very similar with the 483s, right? So 483s design is one of the biggest issues. I think design and risk is going to continue to be a really big issue under QMSR because you have so many historic products that have very, very old design history files that are going to be expected to be compliant with ISO 14971, even though it's not codified. Um, it's just going to be a tough spot for people who have historic documentation. And then after that, next one is kind of manufacturing processes. So, they're looking in the right areas where it's going to actually impact people. Regulatory reasons. So, the big violator is always people going marketing without authorization or marketing with insufficient labeling or incorrect labeling. So either they say, hey, I have a clearance or something, and then I broaden my scope of what is cleared, and we continue to market that. And FDA says, wait, you actually don't have that covered in your clearance, and we need your new 510(k). Or you're just blatantly marketing without authorization at all. And FDA says, hey, you need a 510(k) to make these types of claims, and you need to submit some sort of pre-market notification to FDA, PMA, 510(k), de novo, whatever is the submission that they request. However, we'll talk about these later. You can see there has been kind of a historic moment where FDA issued a 12 warning letters for registration and listing, which I mean, Michelle and other people on the call can comment. I have personally never seen a registration and listing warning letter. I've been in the industry over a decade now. This is the only time I've ever seen one. Um, but FDA does very much troll your website, and I would say that I am seeing as a trend, we're seeing a lot of FDA website perusals and looking through what is available on the internet. So if you look at the data, they only issue 54 warning letters for the entire fiscal year. That's not very many when you consider that there's over 700 warning 483s, and then there's, couple thousand registrations and listings each year. Facilities registered and listed.
So go back, Larry Stevens. Have you in your
Yeah, Larry's the one
history,
to ask.
have you seen a warning letter for FDA establishment registration and listings?
Yeah, yes, I have. It's unusual, and usually it's for foreign firms where they ship a device to the United States, and one of the things that the entry reviewers check is it registered? So the deficiency there is for the importer to
Mhm.
not choose a company, and if he chooses them, make sure they register with FDA before he ships the product.
Okay.
Did you see that go right to warning letter before?
Yeah, it's easy for FDA to do because it's a very clear violation. It's not a
Yeah.
mistake. It's did it but did it wrong. They just didn't do it. And the control of the foreign manufacturers is very important to FDA.
Yep. And even more so now.
Oh yeah.
Mhm. Okay.
Okay, and this is just another table to break down those warning letters. So this table broke it so that on the left-hand side is overall warning letters, and then the right-hand side percentages is taking those registrations and listings out because it kind of skews the data because there's so many of them. But you can see this is right in line with where they're finding 483 issues. Almost all of them are around the CAPA procedures, the complaint procedures, design controls, production controls, and then MDR recall and corrections in the field. So there's no surprise there. They're kind of, 483s match warning letters. That's what you would assume. But we're going to talk about a few of the warning letters that came out in the last year that drove policy and were kind of interesting. So, Michelle, I don't know if you want to present Whoop.
Yep. So this one's kind of interesting. It was a device that is intended to measure blood pressure, and the company was claiming that it was a general wellness product, and the FDA sent them a warning letter saying that it has an inherent use or an inherent intended use that is associated with the diagnostics of hypo or hypertension, and so therefore they considered it for use in the diagnosis of a disease or a condition. So, one thing that's interesting about that warning letter is that, we are all familiar with the intended use and indications for use, but now the FDA has this unspoken inherent use to consider, and that these can wrap up materials or features like antimicrobial coatings, soy filters, or claims including like this a warning letter, the blood pressure monitoring for wellness purposes. And so the FDA says inherent use is where public knowledge can imply a use to a medical device or a monitoring.
Yeah, this is something that we are starting to see more and more of, especially out of COVID. I saw a lot of this where they were like, you're adding these components that have, properties, even though you're not making any statements about them, people will assume that they have a function. And so you need to address it in your submission. We saw a lot of that coming out of COVID and Whoop blood pressure is kind of this warning letter kind of followed that trend. Here's what Whoop had to say. They said FDA is out of its gourd, basically, and that, they were misguided, they were under general wellness. It was actually quite
Yeah, they threw the gauntlet
strongly,
down.
it was quite strongly worded. Um, and after that, after the Whoop warning letter, Apple actually got clearance
Just
for
shortly thereafter.
Yeah, for a hypertension blood pressure feature in their Apple Watch. So Whoop was issued a warning letter. Whoop is arguing with FDA. Apple gets a clearance. And
which
then,
factors into why like that Whoop likely got the warning letter in the first place is because FDA knew that this was coming down the pipes, and they're like, well, we already are regulating this underneath the 510(k), therefore they should that the what am I trying to say, Ty?
well, what happened was they had
That Whoop, like, okay, we just cleared this underneath a 510(k), and then so therefore Whoop is illegally marketed because
well,
we have hypertension.
well, if you look at Apple's clearance, they had submitted in February, and then they were probably doing the back and forth with FDA to talk about it. And then Whoop got issued their warning letter right between these. So they got issued their warning letter in July. So FDA, when they were doing their review, was probably either pointed in that direction or was doing their own organic research to kind of determine which way they wanted to go with this feature, saw Whoop, and they said, well, if I'm going to clear a 510(k) for this feature, why wouldn't I also market the same device under those same scrutiny? I mean, it kind of makes sense, but there's a little bit of reading between the lines and where there could have been some espionage, there could have been some finger pointing, who really knows? What does the wellness guidance say? Joseph asked, did Apple turn them in? We don't know. We're just reading between it. There's no way for us to know. There's no way to know if Apple said, hey, we know we have competitive features and we're going to get the 510(k) clearance just to kind of, it gives you a market advantage if you have 510(k) clearance in some ways. We don't know, but this is the timeline of publicly available information. So the wellness guidance. The wellness guidance has been around for a long time. This is what it says. It's about enforcement discretion for general wellness products that are intended to help, support a healthy lifestyle or help living well with a disease is basically the two categories. So either it's completely health and wellness, or if it acknowledges some sort of disease or condition, it's only to kind of live well with. And these are the big exclusions. It doesn't identify or name diseases. It doesn't put out characteristics as abnormal, pathologic, or diagnostics. It doesn't include clinical thresholds, which this one's kind of hard because you'll see, we'll talk about uh, what happened to this guidance. And then it doesn't provide any ongoing alerts or monitoring to manage a disease conditions. Well, this January, just a couple weeks ago, FDA actually updated this guidance document, and it now explicitly has a blood pressure example in it. So blood pressure as a wrist-worn wearable product, and while pulse rate and blood pressure are measured via this very long word, photoplethysmogram. I only butchered
Say
it
it,
a little
say
bit.
it 5 times.
Um, is now explicitly a wellness category. So that's very interesting, right? If you look at this story, Apple submits their 510(k). Whoop gets a warning letter. Apple gets clearance. But then in January, FDA revises this guidance to clearly allow Whoop to be a wellness product. Also in January, FDA announces the Tempo pilot, which is this risk-based pilot that is for expanding digital health devices to support chronic conditions. And I have mixed feelings about this because the chronic conditions they list are pretty high risk. It's for cardiometabolic, musculoskeletal, and behavioral health. And what the intention is that patient monitoring digital health devices for home use are going to be given some sort of enforcement discretion for their pre-market notification, meaning that they are going to align with FDA to have less requirements to sell their products so that they can get real-world performance data using this risk-based approach in alignment with FDA's policy. And FDA also is going to follow the CMS access model so that there's hopefully, reimbursement for these devices and everything. It's kind of a double-edged sword because it means that you might have less requirements for these at-home based monitoring systems for cardio, vulnerable people or musculoskeletal vulnerable patient populations. But there might be a need here and that it's just not being met. That's why FDA put out this tempo pilot because there's a recognized understanding that you need more devices in these spaces. We need better patient monitoring, especially in a home-based care. So they've announced the tempo pilot in January. Well, they announced it in December. It's open in January. So if you follow this whole timeline, it kind of paints the picture for where the agency is today, January 2026. It's it's definitely a shift in policy. So we should have had one more dot here, which is that Apple submitted their blood pressure 510(k), but then Whoop gets a warning letter, which is where FDA's position was in July of 2025. Whoop disagrees with it. Apple gets their clearance, and they're still the only product that has clearance under that product code we checked. And then FDA announces this tempo pilot, so it's basically saying that they want more products in patient monitoring, they want more products in digital home healthcare, and that they are intending to work with industry to do an enforcement discretion policy to determine what the real controls around those devices should be. And then they update their general wellness guidance explicitly for blood pressure monitoring, which used to historically always be a clearance product. So you can see there's kind of a deregulation shift in terms of digital health software patient monitoring, is what I'm inferring from that. Larry, I see you're nodding your head. I'm sure you have a lot of feelings, whether you want to talk about them or not. That's just the trends that we see. And I don't know if anyone else is seeing any of these sort of trends too.
Well, I think you're very accurate in the deregulation thing. That's a general discussion within the government now.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
the key is risk-based approach. In other words, the FDA is really focusing now on risk assessment all through your company. And that's what they're looking at is do does the product itself present a direct risk to the patient? Now, and if it does, then they're going to take action. But if it's this indication of blood pressure uh, doesn't really put the patient in any danger, the only way would be if it gave said a false low reading and says you're in good shape, don't worry about it, and they have a stroke afterwards. So you can theorize it, but the deregulation is what this is, and I don't think it's bad. I think from a business perspective, it's a reasonable thing to approach.
On occasion, yeah. I mean, it's kind of an interesting area because I think about blood pressure and I think about these wearables, right? And under enforcement discretion, there's really no performance data required. And I think about my husband who does have high blood pressure and does take medication for it. He has the cuff at home, has to do a log. Not so much anymore, but I think about if people start relying on these watches and there's no performance data, does that cause an issue? And I think that there's just got to be more transparency and more awareness with consumer purchases. And knowing when you can trust a consumer product versus a medical device for medical purposes. I think that's going to be hard for the public to navigate. Because when I was doing just research on this, I am a self-proclaimed nerd. I was like, well, what are the performances for Whoop? I'm like really genuinely curious. And lots of people in the threads were discussing how Whoop was consistently off. I mean, this was a while ago, and this is not my own testimonies, but that they had to rely on their at-home blood pressure cuffs to get accurate readings. So it's just it's an interesting area for consumers, I think, that don't necessarily have the medical literacy to know what they're purchasing and how accurate something is.
So before we move on, I wanted to see if anybody had any comments. I was going to comment that I took the last screen about the pilot program um, and did a screenshot of it and then put it into ChatGPT and said, say more. And the most interesting thing that they had to say was, at a higher level, tempo reflects a broader FDA posture. Ongoing evidence beats static documentation. Life cycle thinking outweighs one-time submissions, and real-world performance is becoming a regulatory asset. I've been saying this for several years at this point, which is you have all this evidence once a device hits the market. And the clinical trials are, 300 people usually at most. And so you have this gigantic data set around performance and adverse events. And it's just really underutilized, not only by um, the the regulatory bodies, but by manufacturers themselves, in terms of finding new market opportunities, um, and you know, really competitive advantage. I mean, it is the key to everything is how does it perform in real life? And so I thought I'd just derail the conversation with that.
I
Well,
think there's a lot to be, but I mean, I think there's something to be said for that because something that we all see is, there's a balance and a struggle between the agency and industry and bringing things up to the current state of the art, right? Because you do a one-time submission and maybe your 510(k) is 20 years old. And then by the time FDA comes to audit it, it's like, uh, you are making practically a whole new device sometimes by the time FDA comes and audits you because you've had a design change here, a design change here, a letter to file there, a letter to file there. And then it's like, oh, my biocompatibility testing is 40 years old and I realize I've changed manufacturers or something like that. And maybe I have like just an increase in rashes. There's a lot of things that proactive documentation and like collecting real world data, I think with the FDA subsystems is really underused utilized.
Martin.
Um, yeah, Martin, you gotta.
Yeah, in back in around about 2010, I read some PricewaterhouseCoopers publication which was talking about continuous evidence would come, and I think we're seeing that right across the industry. And so, what is it? It's not unreasonable to ask for post-market information. If a company doesn't have enough information, then the agency says, well, yes, we'll give you a provisional approval, but you have to deliver post-market data. And what we see in Europe is post-market surveillance. So really, for me, this is all resilience. It's all coming down to continuously monitoring your product in the market and making sure it's safe. How can you make sure that your product's not safe without continuously monitoring? Okay. Makes sense.
well
Yeah.
said.
Um, there's also been some comments in the chat. Hold on. Let me back up a little bit.
So Sarah asked, how much advance notice does FDA give prior to an inspection? They can show up unannounced. I've seen it announced a week in advance. I've seen it announced a month in advance. And then I've had them physically show up unannounced at least twice in my career.
Michelle, can you read the questions? Because I can't see them because I'm sharing.
So so that was Sarah. Then Steve says getting the technical files for virtual manufacturers sourcing from Chinese manufacturers is sometimes difficult, especially after many years of not asking for them. And if you're a small customer or they have a proprietary concerns, what can be done to remain in compliance? So technical files are a little outside of the scope of this particular topic, but this is a very big issue with in Europe for the MDR it's near impossible because they have to give you so much information that they're giving up their proprietary information. So that leaves it on the virtual manufacturer to be able to prove all the data and testing on their own, and they can't just rely on the fact that the supplier may or may not have a technical file. And Susan says, what about data protection in these cases? I'm not sure what that means, if that's like
Oh, data
HPI.
protection, like patient data protection? Well, I mean, whoops, not doesn't have to have any from a FDA perspective. It's under an enforcement discretion, so it does have to follow, standard data protection laws. Um, if you purchase, uh, Apple's watch, then they at least would have had to provide all the cybersecurity for that information, which includes data protection. So,
Okay.
any other questions?
Alyssa says, if you are MDSAP certified, would FDA ever inspect you? How would a warning letter come along?
Oh,
So,
Michelle and I have stories about that.
yep. So, fun fact, FDA does not accept MDSAP certificates. They accept audit reports, and then they audit the audit report to determine if they agree with the conclusion and the ratings of the findings or not.
And that is also only for routine audits.
Right.
So FDA absolutely will still come audit you even if you are MDSAP certified. Do not think that your MDSAP certification and report will get you out of the cycle because FDA, if they audit you for risk, and that doesn't mean that your company is a risky company. It can be based off of the type of product you make or trends that they're seeing in industry or their own internal analytics and analysis, they can still justify that as a full risk audit or for the organization's audit and still come in and audit you. We've had lots of customers who get their MDSAP certification thinking that they'll never be audited because they're getting their MDSAP reports every year, but FDA will still come in. We saw this with additive manufacturing, people who had 3D printing, they got audited every single year. We saw that with menstrual cup clients. They also were high priority devices for FDA at that time period. And so FDA continued to audit them. Michelle, I know you have other good examples of that, but FDA won't just accept the report if it's an initiative or around something that they need to collect or they've decided that your device is in a higher risk category or something like that.
Martin, I see you were entertained by this discussion.
Right, because I just took a company through their MDSAP and I just made it clear that you you probably reduce the odds that you'll be audited,
Yeah.
but it won't be removed. And I also had an experience of an unannounced audit where marketing people in the company had this great idea to change the promotional material on the website, and it no longer aligned with the IFUs in the product, which was
Uh,
packaged inside someone else's product. So the FDA then flagged this.
a
You know,
classic.
what's going on? And they call me and say, "What should we do?" I said, "Take the website down." and and I said, "And be ready for an audit." And sure enough, they got an audit.
Yeah.
It was an unannounced audit, but no big deal. Everything was fine. It was just because the marketing people screwed up with the website. But be ready, always be ready.
Mhm. Oh, okay, so we'll move. I'll answer these other one-off questions towards the
Towards the
end,
end.
so we can get through the warning letter trends.
Okay. So we kind of talked about this. Registration and listing warning letters, chest binder warning letters. This was, I mean,
All in one day.
all in one day, 12 warning letters came out for chest binders. So FDA was reviewing websites. It says here, per your firm's website, you can see from all the click-ins. FDA was reviewing websites for chest binders, and they came out. The common term that all of them said was to ease or assist with gender dysphoria. Um, I think that they got nailed because they used the word dysphoria in their website marketing. I think that that was probably the internal parameters that FDA had set around writing these warning letters, which is kind
That
of
because
interesting
FDA considers that a medical condition.
because, yeah, gender dysphoria is a medical condition. Um, so you need to pay attention to the administration. FDA Commissioner Marty Makary was already talking about it when he did his press release. It was a little bit interesting because he said, marketing these products for children is alarming, which there were no pediatric indications on the websites or cited in the warning letters. But, FDA is taking enforcement action. This is all, it's kind of a weird disconnect, in my opinion, because when you look at the class one product code and the medical description of it, it's used for medical purposes, um, for the underlying body, and their examples are often for like post-surgical, right? Like they're post-surgical. These are 510(k) exempt devices. These are GMP exempt devices. I would think that the dysphoria claim would be even beyond the regulation for this binder, because it's dealing with behavior health or mental health, which is kind of how FDA deals with depression and anxiety, right? So depression and anxiety are different indications, and dysphoria would be a different indication. So the warning letters were written around gender dysphoria. The regulation is really about being a medical binder, usually post-surgery is the most common registration and listing medical device version of this. The chest binders that were written up were intended, for the transgendered population, helping with gender dysphoria. They're almost, if you remove that claim, they would be not even medical devices. They would be almost commodity products at that point because there's not really any medical claim around them. So it's interesting that FDA used time and resources for a class one 510(k) exempt product that's GMP exempt as well. It doesn't even have to follow good manufacturing practices. I mean, your quality management system is basically reporting complaints and records. Um, but it tells you that you need to be paying attention to what the administration is doing because they are driving where FDA is allotting resources, right? So keep that in
Yeah.
mind.
And
With
like how we got to marketing these products for children, we still have not pieced that one together.
Yeah, that is still whatever. Foreign labs.
Oh, this is a fun one.
Yeah, so There's been a lot of issues for years. I would say, what, 3 years, 4 years? Kind of since AI started coming around when they could kind of massively review old 510(k)s, in my opinion, and developed ELSA, data has come into question, right, for foreign labs. Well, FDA is actually writing up foreign labs with warning letters. So two of them have been in China, one has been out of India. They all had GLP findings with them. And this aligns with FDA's announcement May 6, 2025, that they were going to conduct unannounced inspections of foreign manufacturers and facilities, and they want to promote domestic production and reevaluate the approach to pre-approval inspections. That's kind of beyond this, but they are no longer pre-announcing inspections of foreign facilities. At the time, they had a bunch of RIF actions, so they paused the foreign inspections pilot, but I think they are now starting to do this. And we're seeing this by these labs getting audited and getting issued warning letters for them. And then this also happened with Wuxi AppTech. Michelle, I don't know if you want to talk about the Biosecure Act and what happened with
Yeah.
Wuxi.
Like I see your warning letter and I raise you. Like I did not even know that this mechanism, the Biosecure Act, existed before Wuxi got its citation. And basically, the owner of Wuxi, who is Chinese, was funding demonstrations by the Chinese government. And the FDA said that this is a threat to national security, that they have so much of our data, and including safety data, formulations, all kinds of things. And so the FDA cited Wuxi and told companies that it would no longer recognize data generated by Wuxi. And then ultimately, Wuxi had to dismember their U.S. Lab and sold it off to NAMSA, because they were not even their U.S. lab was allowed to conduct tests because it was all owned and operated by the same main office in China.
And what's crazy
Um,
about that is that Wuxi was a very credible lab. They were on the ASCA
mhm.
list for
Yeah.
certain things. They were generally well accepted by FDA. As with all labs, you've got to pick, who's good at what when you're doing it. Um, but they were on the ASCA list for certain tests. You know, we've done submissions with Wuxi data and haven't had issues with it. So it was on the surface a credible lab, but now it's had this Biosecure Act violation and had to dissolve its U.S. operations since.
Larry, have you seen Biosecure Act being invoked previously?
No, not really, but I think this is as much political as it is public health. In other
Hmm.
words, there's a general move to try and get stuff done outside of the country done in the country, and
Yeah.
so I think they use this as a tool. FDA does not enforce the the biosurf, whatever
The
that law
Biosecure
is.
Act,
The
yeah.
key here is that if you are a laboratory and you're doing testing that's going to be used as an addendum to an approval application, the manufacturer that submits the application has to certify that the laboratory testing was done in accordance with GLP.
Oh.
So that's their tool for sending warning letters. Is they saw some kind of deficiency in the data and telling them you no longer can do testing that's going to be sent in as part of a submission.
Well, these warning letters were conducted on site. So when you read them, you can tell that they went on site and looked at the state of the labs themselves. A lot of them got dinged because they reused animals, actually.
Right.
Yeah, they reused animals, and then obviously they one of them was really bad. It like had the study lead also signing that they did all the work. So there was like no independent review, and there was like weird backdating issues with the study lead. I mean, they were pretty egregious. I'll be honest, if I read these, I would be pretty upset if I had used any of them for my test data.
Well,
But
the warning letter would have to be based on direct observations of deficiencies at the lab.
yeah.
That's how they do it.
So, but I think you're totally right, Larry. Like there's a push to promote domestic production, domestic labs.
Yeah.
I think the trend of the agency right now is to really push domestic. Um, Michelle and I have seen more issues with imports and customs than we've ever seen before. I mean, people who have been importing product for 5, 6 years are doing things by the book. They are getting held up, in ports. So, in terms of the agency and where administration is driving it, I'm definitely seeing that there is a big push towards domestic, and especially away from kind of, you know, East Asia. Michelle, I don't know if you want to add anything.
No, let's get through the okay, that's it.
That's it. We're
Okay.
done.
Okay.
Good.
Well,
Michelle,
no, go ahead, David.
oh, sorry. So I wanted to question a little bit FDA unannounced foreign inspections. When I've been in foreign inspections, particularly in Switzerland, the Swiss authority also would show up at the inspection because I understood that FDA as a government entity needed to notify the local federal entity in Switzerland, France, China, maybe prior, and particularly in China and India, give me 3 months notice that you're coming in, the summertime of 26. I'm fixing my facilities. Quite different than a domestic inspection where they might be here this afternoon. Do you have any
Okay.
insight on that or
Well,
changes to
that's
regulation?
one thing I was like, okay, what is the logistics of unannounced inspections? Because most countries require the FDA to not notify them and then get work visas. So how can you do an unannounced inspection when you have to have a work visa and then the in-country count equivalent of the FDA will likely come with them too, and then in turn notify. So, and to get a work visa, you have to be sponsored by the company that you're going to see. So
Michelle and I
it's
have been talking a lot
yeah.
about this internally because it doesn't seem like the logistics are well thought out. So they put in May 6th, 2025, that they're going to conduct these unannounced audits. Um, but I just don't know how they're going to handle it logistics wise, right?
Mm.
And then they had such big layoffs, um, that it makes it even harder because there's less personnel. Sandy said in
Yeah.
Canada there have been unannounced audits and they just show up. I'm sure it's going to be
Yeah.
country dependent, like we were saying, on whether or not they require to have a visa, whether or not they're required to, have translators, whether or not they're required to have any sort of other infrastructure. Um, so it might be a case of if the requirements are low to entry and they have a goal to get a certain number done, then maybe like, our Canadian companies are going to get hit more.
Yeah. I just wondering, as Michelle was commenting, um, I don't remember if FDA still has pilot offices in China or in India or other places, um, or the RIFs have really pulled that back. But I would presume if they had a China-based FDA facility, they could probably walk into a China manufacturer without visas, without much of anything, but that's a big guess.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And Steve, I see in Canada, FDA just shows up. There's an agreement in place with Canada's government. I know that the Health Canada and FDA have been working really closely because even Health Canada has started their E-Star pilot. So I'm sure it's a little bit different for Canada than it is for other parts in the world for the unannounced audits. Because Canada has been and FDA have been leveraging a lot. There's been a pilot for E-Star in Canada for a while now.
So Kevin says, do FDA audit initial importer in the US and manufacturers outside the US and in Canada? So FDA does not audit initial importers. And the initial importers don't even really have to have a quality management system. All they have to do is register with the FDA. I don't even think that they have to like list the particular products that they're importing. And then Christy says, what if you are a startup using a contract manufacturer and the startup offices are at the contract manufacturer's facility because there's no revenue yet? Would the FDA inspection only be for the startup documentation, or can they inspect the contract manufacturer? So when FDA goes in, first off, they will only inspect you if you have active registration and listing. And then secondly, they have to come in with a 482, which is their notice of inspection. And that notice of inspection is only good for the company and facility that states on the scope. So to go and inspect at the contract manufacturer or inspect the contract manufacturer's operations, there has to be a separate 482 issued to the contract manufacturer. Larry, did I get that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Mhm. And then our old friend Ray Walker says, does a manufacturer need to insist that products sold non-sterile to kit packers for surgery and field packs used only by licensed professionals in surgical procedures include IFUs for inherent risk? So the term inherent risk is just something that we have seen come up in warning letters, and it's usually associated with inherent use rather than inherent risk. So, Larry, do you
Yeah,
have any
it's
commentary on
usually
that?
what they're looking at are MDR reports of off-label use or things like that where there's a certain risk associated with it, inherent, and in which case they will go to the company and suggest that they revise their IFU to add that as a precaution. But
Mhm.
it's all a risk-based thing.
Mhm. And then if you change your IFUs to add a warning or a caution based off of an adverse event, then you have to file a new 510K.
Well, not necessarily. In
Mhm.
other words, a PMA for sure if it's a PMA product, but the labeling, if you remove warnings, that can get you in trouble from your 510K labeling. But the safest thing to do would be to go ahead and add it as a precaution and then send that to FDA, say, update my 510K file with this new IFU rather than a whole new 510K.
Mhm.
Any other
Okay.
questions?
Do you think companies building in health regulatory AI can assist in any way to keep people adequate with the updates and monitoring the regulations? AI has its place in everything, but the problem is that you have to know enough about what you're doing to know when it's wrong and when it's hallucinating.
Yeah.
And for example, we have a new employee pretty much right out of college. One of the things that he has to do is like we have office hours and he debriefs us every every week about what happened. And one week it was a slow news week. So he was just like, well, I just came across this article and it was written by Gen AI and it talked about the special 510K program. And the first time it referenced special 510K in parentheses, it put SBD. SBD is a small business designation and it has nothing to do with a special 510K.
Yeah, it was totally messed up.
Mhm. And then we've also had it quite comedically suggest, Ty, what was the product that you were looking it
Yeah,
up
I
in
was looking
ChatGPT?
up a patient, like it was like a riff on a patient identification tag, kind of. And so I was looking to see if there was a more specific product code for it, because a lot of times when you have this had an adhesive in it, and a lot of these class ones have requirements against adhesive. And I looked it up, you know, standard chat GPT. It was very confident. It's like, here's your three-letter product code, here's what the regulation says, here's your regulation. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. That might have saved me a lot of time. So I go over to the FDA product code database and I look up this three-letter product code and it gave me a circumcision tool. And I went, that is not a patient identifier at all. This is a completely made up fake product code with a fake regulation. And if I didn't know how to verify the source of truth, it would have absolutely been wrong. And if you don't know what you're looking at, you have no idea if that's, right or wrong. I'm not saying like AI, like I'm not poo-pooing AI. I just think that there's an understanding of the limitations at where it's at these days. And having a technical skill set will make me better at using it, but might do a disservice for people who are up and coming in their careers.
Um, so do you expect a change of 483 type and quantity after the FDA inspections under the QMSR? And honestly, I do not see a difference of coming because underneath the QSR, those top five areas were where industry was consistently not meeting the expectations of the QSR. So if
Yeah.
you're not already at meeting the expectations of the QSR, you're even further behind the eight ball when it comes to meeting the QMSR and ISO 13485. And we actually have a series of classes that go into a great amount of detail about the differences between the QSR, the QMSR, and the correlation between the what to expect out of those top five areas in 483s.
I think if you look at the way 483s are already read too, there's some expectation from FDA in how you are implementing some of this information because they have to write them so specific. But Michelle and I went through and looked and we found ones where they were calling out risk, right? And risk, there's only one mention of it in the actual QSR. The preamble talks a lot about it, but the QSR only has one mention of it, and it's with software validation, so it's kind of weird. But I think the expectations is that FDA has already been auditing to a higher level. They're just going to be able to write their 483s more clearly because they're not going to be strong armed into writing them against 1996 language where they still use concessions to meet to mean like rework or approving without rework. So I think it will make it clearer when you read your 483s about what the issue is, but it's still going to be in the same trending data.
And I would like to encourage anybody that's interested in learning more about the classes, QMSR, CAPA, management review. What are the other ones?
Complaint recording, reporting, and recall is coming soon.
Yeah, anybody
Emergency.
that wants to learn more about these classes, write classes in the chat and I will, send you a link or something like that. Or, call you and bother you. No, I won't do that. Um, we're about out of time. And I would like to thank Michelle and Tiana for their time and everybody who joined today. We had like 200 people at the High Point. And so that I think is a record for the Friday call. And let's see. Next week, Mark Omo is going to be talking to us about connected devices for regulatory and quality people, not for engineers. And I have lots of conversations with him about the Bluetooth in my car and how it flummoxes me every time. So if the Bluetooth in your car flummoxes you, think about trying to use a connected device. And what Bluetooth connectivity and other kinds of connectivity mean for device users. I think it's an interesting topic. I think it's timely, and I encourage you all to attend. Uh, Closing notes, Michelle, Tiana.
I think we're good to go. Someone said if we are beginning in the field, where is the best place to start? I would look at CDRH Learn. If you haven't, I think that's a really great resource for beginners and it's straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak.
And my YouTube channel.
Yeah, and Michelle's YouTube channel, the leanRAQA YouTube channel, has a lot of information as well. So those are two great resources for you.
Oh, and be sure to subscribe to MedTech Leading Voice at
Mhm.
medtechleadingvoice.com. We're at 8,500 subscribers, so woo!
Look at
Uh,
you.
yeah, excitement.
All right.
That's it. Thank
Thank
you,
you,
everyone.
everyone. Thanks for paying
Have a great
attention during
weekend.
your Friday.